What if I told you that one of the richest countries in the world was built in part on the forced labor of millions of enslaved people? Imagine waking up one morning. Your family is torn away from you. You're chained, forced onto a crowded ship, and sent across an ocean to a land you've never seen. No freedom, no choice, no escape. For millions of African men, women, and children, this wasn't fiction. It was reality. For over 200 years, slavery became one of the darkest chapters in American history. It shaped the nation's economy, fueled massive plantations, and left scars that can still be felt today. But how did slavery begin? Why did it last for so long? And what finally brought this brutal system to an end? This is the shocking true story of slavery in America. A story of suffering, resistance, courage, and the long fight for freedom. Long before the United States became an independent nation, the land was divided into European colonies. These colonies were growing rapidly, but they faced one major problem. They needed workers. At first, many plantations relied on indentured servants from Europe. These workers agreed to work for several years in exchange for passage to America. But plantation owners wanted something different. They wanted a labor force they could control for life. In 1619, a ship arrived at Jamestown, Virginia, carrying a group of captive Africans. This moment is widely recognized as the beginning of African slavery in what would later become the United States. Over the next several decades, colonial governments passed new laws that made slavery permanent and hereditary. If a child was born to an enslaved mother, that child was also enslaved from birth. Families could be separated at any time. People could be bought and sold like property. Basic human rights were denied. As tobacco plantations expanded across Virginia and Maryland, the demand for enslaved labor increased rapidly. Plantation owners earned enormous profits, making slavery a central part of the colonial economy. By the early 1700s, slavery had spread throughout much of the southern colonies. Large plantations depended on the forced labor of thousands of enslaved Africans, while a system of laws was created to keep them under strict control. For plantation owners, slavery meant wealth. For millions of enslaved people, it meant a lifetime without freedom. And this was only the beginning. The system would continue to expand for generations, eventually shaping the future of the entire nation. As the colonies grew richer, the demand for labor increased dramatically. During the 1700s, millions of Africans were captured and forced onto ships crossing the Atlantic Ocean in what became known as the transatlantic slave trade. The journey was brutal. Hundreds of people were packed tightly into dark, overcrowded ships with little food, almost no fresh air, and terrible living conditions. Many died before reaching America. Those who survived were taken to slave markets, where families were often separated forever. Children were sold away from their parents. Husbands and wives were separated. People were treated as property instead of human beings. By the late 1700s, slavery had become one of the most profitable parts of the Southern economy. Then, in 1793, everything changed. A machine called the cotton gin made cotton production much faster and far more profitable. As cotton exports exploded, plantation owners wanted even more enslaved workers. New plantations spread across Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, Georgia, and Texas. Millions of acres of land were turned into cotton fields, worked by enslaved labor. Meanwhile, many northern states gradually abolished slavery and began industrializing. This created a growing divide between the North and the South. One region depended on factories and paid workers. The other depended heavily on enslaved labor and agriculture. The disagreement over slavery grew larger every year. America was becoming two very different nations, and before long, that conflict would push the country toward one of the bloodiest wars in its history. By the mid-1800s, the United States was deeply divided. In the North, many people believed slavery was morally wrong and should be abolished. The northern economy was becoming more industrial, relying on factories, railroads, and paid workers instead of enslaved labor. In the South, however, slavery remained the foundation of the economy. Cotton plantations generated enormous wealth, and many Southern leaders believed ending slavery would destroy their way of life. The conflict became even more intense after new Western territories joined the United States. A difficult question emerged. Would these new states allow slavery, or would they be free? The debate grew more heated every year. Then, in 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president of the United States. Although Lincoln's early goal was to prevent the spread of slavery into new territories rather than immediately abolish it everywhere, many Southern leaders feared that slavery's future was in danger. Soon after the election, 11 Southern states left the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. In April 1861, fighting began. The American Civil War had started. For 4 long years, the nation was torn apart. Brother fought against brother. Entire towns were destroyed. More than 600,000 soldiers lost their lives, making it one of the deadliest wars in American history. In 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that enslaved people in Confederate-held areas were to be free. While it did not instantly free everyone, it changed the purpose of the war and encouraged many formerly enslaved people to join the Union cause. Finally, in 1865, the Union won the Civil War. Later that same year, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution officially abolished slavery throughout the United States. After more than 2 centuries, the legal system of slavery had finally come to an end. But freedom did not mean inequality. A new struggle was about to begin. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, please like, subscribe, and join us for more stories from American history.